Matt, Sebastian, and Maria about rating the data management plans, the lessons learned from the Qualitative DMP competition. I know a lot of us are looking forward to this. Thank you. Take it away.
Great, thanks. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for having us. We're happy to be here and to talk about some of the lessons that we learned from running the Qualitative DMP competition. And I'll be presenting first and driving slides, and then pass it over to Sebastian, and Maria will finish us out. So taking you back a little bit before the inception of the competition, Sebastian and I were having conversations about advising folks on drafting qualitative DMPs or data management plans for qualitative and multi-method research. So we saw that there's this trend that ever more qualitative multi-method researchers are drafting DMPs, and that's great. We want to support that. A lot of us, here on this call are in favor of this. And what folks like me in a research data service who, I'm connected directly to researchers at Princeton University, we're often getting requests for DMP templates that somebody's in a rush to fill out and submit a grant, and they want something they can quickly adapt for their own project. And that's not as great. We really want researchers to write real plans and not just cut and paste from boilerplate language. So Sebastian and I were having this conversation about, where's the right balance here? And we recognize that there is a balance between just emulating somebody else's plan and completely reinventing the wheel. And that's what DMP tool is for, which is great. We all benefit from that. So we started talking and thinking maybe we should get Maria in the mix here, because the qualitative aspects of research make it a real challenge to describe what a really good qualitative DMP looks like. So we figured what we need are some examples of high quality DMPs, and we didn't know where they were. Where was the place to bring them all together? So we had the idea to crowdsource it and set up a new competition that we'd call the Qualitative DMP Competition. And we figured that a lot of data services and open scholarship folks, like those of you here, would be invested in promotion. This is something that there's a demand for from a lot of us. And we could incentivize researchers to compete. They have a small cash prize. They can get a line on their CV. They'll show us the good DMPs that they have. And our community is already rich with qualified judges who can tell us which are the exemplary DMPs. So it's perfect for a competition setup. We can recruit some judges, have independent evaluation. We just needed to do the work to pull it all together. And in the end, the solution, the idea here is that everyone will be better off. All right, that's it for me.
All right, I think this is where I jump in. So for the rules, one of the first things, sort of as we were envisioning how this would all work, one of our first tasks was to set the parameters for participating in our competition. So setting the rules. So obviously the goal was DMPs from qualitative data research projects. So the DMPs needed to be describing a research project that was largely qualitative in nature. So we were very broad about how we were defining qualitative, and we linked to a list from QDR, just all about what are some examples of qualitative data. So including things like interviews, field notes, meeting minutes, correspondence, government statistics, public documents. There's a pretty broad definition of what is qualitative data. So we took, in terms of length, the standard NSF DMP, and most funders are asking for 2 pages. So that's what we were following, that same requirement. Fundamentally important was that it was publicly available online. Sharing it on Google Open did not qualify as publicly available. So we steered people to either making it public through the DMP tool, or you could publish it through the Zenodo platform. We did this project before we had the new DMP ID, so people weren't able to generate unique identifiers for their DMP in the DMP tool at this time. Going forward, in subsequent competitions, I hope that we can use the new feature to get DOIs for DMPs. And we were open to data management plans from either current people who were, actively submitting for funding, or for past proposals. If you could go to the next slide, please. So what makes an exemplary DMP? Obviously, setting some standards for rating these plans was important. And thankfully, we did not have to start from scratch. There was a great project that was funded by IMLS. I think it was 2017. That was Amanda Whitmire, Jake Carlson, Brian Restrup, Tricia Houswe, Susan Wells Parnham. They published this in OSF, and it is a rubric designed to standardize the review of data management plans for data librarians. So it takes out each of the sort of root questions in an NSF DMP, and the reviewer addresses whether or not the DMP includes that information in their plan, and they're rating it as either it is complete or maybe detailed, sort of a middle rating, and then incomplete, did not address. So we built off of this rubric and made some adjustments to fit our use case. Really, we were trying to shift it a little bit to take quality into account. So not looking about just whether or not it was mentioned in the data management plan, but whether or not it was sufficiently explained and their rationale seemed to make sense. So we also streamlined it a little bit and focused on a few key categories, and we added a few questions that we thought were relevant. But really, a lot of what we did is thanks to the DART rubric. So can you go to the next slide? This is our rubric. So you'll recognize a lot of these questions. I don't expect you all to, I'm not going to go over all of them, but really a lot of these are from standard NSF questions, but you can see that we did add some questions that are slightly different regarding sensitive data, looking at the repository that someone has selected for their data deposit. If you go to the next slide, please. So our judging process, this was our panel of 5 expert data librarians who have experience working with qualitative data. And I feel like I saw a few in the audience listed. So maybe somebody will want to pipe up with any comments or thoughts on participating. But so in total, we received 18 submissions, which I was really pleased about. This was definitely an experiment. I'd never run a project like this before. I don't believe that Matt or Sebastian had. We didn't really know if we were going to be able to get traction and get good submissions, but we did. We got 18 full, real good submissions. So I was very pleased with that. We spread them out amongst the judges. Each one got between 10 and 12. We gave them our rubric with the 18 targeted questions, and they took each point and evaluated it on this scale. So it's literally like an Excel spreadsheet or a spreadsheet where you're just marking each criteria point. And then at the end, there was a final kind of overall quality rating where they had rated it from 1 to 10. We also included kind of a notes field at the end where judges could include some overall observations and give a little text kind of summary of their overall thinking of the plan. Looking at the overall sort of rubric scores, they were really closely correlated between the individual item points and the overall score. So that makes it, seems that this rubric was really closely aligned with the judge's kind of overall assessment of quality, which was a good sign of things. So with that, I'm gonna pass it to Sebastian to talk about the winners.
All right, so who won? Next slide. Here you can see our wonderful winners. We had originally intended for 10. The judging was so close between number 10 and 11, and there was a bit of a gap after between 11 and 12. So we turned it up to 11 and have 11 winning DMPs. They were mostly social science. So we had sociology, poli-sci, geography, anthropology, but we also had one oral history project and one from library science. Something that I was particularly pleased about, and I think that really shows the role of this community in doing this work, is that I think 3 of the winners asked us specifically to acknowledge the data librarian they had worked with as part of their of our announcement, and a 4th of the winner was Patty Condon, who is a data librarian. So yay for data librarians. All right, next slide.
5 minutes.
To give you a little bit of a better sense, I've picked up 3. These weren't the best, but these were kind of show nicely the breadth of kind of what we got. And what you see here is the original citation. Again, the link is in the slide. And then we picked for every winner, we picked kind of exemplary quotes from the note field that Maria talked about from the judges. And so just to kind of highlight what different people did. So Laura Garbs, who works on a public radio organization, a sociologist out of Brown, and what she did, she had all sorts of different data. So archival data, interview data of different sensitivity. And what she did really well, and what the judges really liked, was that she thought very critically about how can we do the right things with different types of data. Not all data need to be treated with the same level of confidentiality and security. So that was really cool. Carolina from Princeton was actually one of the cases that we were really concerned about, including that not all data can be shared, right? Some data, and you can get from the title of her dissertation research, her data certainly falls in this category, is so sensitive that it probably shouldn't be shared in some cases. And so her DMP, she did a really careful job describing how she was going to secure her data and why it couldn't be reasonably shared, even with the available safeguards that we have for sensitive data like controlled access, etc. And then a third really interesting project, this is from Jackie Hall, who is a linguist. And so she works with indigenous data. That comes up a fair amount in qualitative data, and indigenous data has a whole other layer of sensitivity that's not just individual sensitivity, but also the sensitivity of the entire group that you're doing research with, and their ownership of the data. And data sovereignty is the term that most commonly used in data management. And so she had thought really well about how do I do this in a way that respects the data sovereignty of the indigenous people that I'm working with. How do I use data services that include indigenous people, or actually have indigenous people run the governance of? All right, next slide. As Matt started out saying, we think exemplary DMPs are great research and a great teaching tool. Rather than having people use templates, and there's some literature about showing how templates can actively be harmful, you show these great examples that are super specific and that you can't just, take out some things and put on some other things. They just show you how a really well done DMP could look, and how it's super specific to the research that you're doing. And so we think they're great examples. And one of the ways we devised the competition is to make sure that they're all public, so you can all access them. Now, we don't think qualitative research is the only area in need of better DMPs, so hold your own DMP competition. All of our materials, including the rubric and the analysis script and R that we use to analyze it, are available on OSF, and the link is in the slide. Final slide, please. And that's us. Please be in touch if you have any questions. We'd love to help you hold your own DMP competition. And that's it.
Thank you so much. Attendees, please, we're getting a lot of applause, and please put your questions in the Q&A. We have one question already. Many researchers from non-STEM disciplines seem to feel excluded from discussions regarding data-related conversations. What sort of reactions did these researchers have to applying their qualitative research to DMPs and data?
ahead,
I have some thoughts on this. So we have selection bias, obviously, right? The people who did apply already had, in most cases, data management plans written. But those people who did all thought it was very valuable. Most of them had some sort of consultation, in some cases 2 consultations with the data librarian. Some of them had actually previously talked to QDR, and they all found that having that thought process, thinking critically about how do I manage my data, which, remember, isn't just how do I share my data, but also how do I organize it, how do I document it, right? How do I secure it, and found that very valuable. And as an anecdotal other point, as part of my work at QDR, we do data management consultation at our Summer Institute for Qualitative Methods, which has about 200 graduate researchers every summer coming to Syracuse, and people find those consultations incredibly valuable, whether they are going to be sharing their data or not. Kind of stepping back and thinking, how am I going to organize this that in a way that allows me to do good research with the enormous amounts of data that I'm collecting is, I would say, in some cases even more important for something like qualitative or historical data, because you have so many different files in kind of somewhat unstructured formats. So generally, once people see what DMP is about, they react enthusiastically.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think part of what's going on is that folks who might feel like they're left out in some of the materials and support need to see more materials and examples and things that are out there. And that's what we're trying to do. You're still going to have that selection bias. You're still going to have those enterprising people who are going to their data librarians and getting good advice. But if we want to try to scale out and reach more people, then we need to advertise more and better materials.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm going to kind of combine the last 2 questions since we've just got a minute left. Did you have a chance to compile tips or good practices when writing qualitative research DMPs beyond what's in the rubric, and especially about balancing maybe the IRB restrictions?
We haven't. There may be something to be written, but it's also, I think the biggest emphasis that I think I would put is make it specific, and every data project needs individual thought rather than global categories. So, yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We've got lots of applause, virtual applause. Our next presentation is going to be from Whitney Johnson Freeman on forging connections at the University of North Texas to comply with funder-mandated public access to research data. Whitney, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Right. So it's quite the mouthful, but I'll be speaking on how the University of North Texas is attempting to comply with funder-mandated public access to research data. We implemented this process almost a year ago. We've made a lot of headway over the past year, so I'd like to share my experience with this process, but also working collaboratively across campus. But first, some introductions. So my name is Whitney Johnson Freeman. I am the repository librarian at the University of North Texas. I oversee the archival work of campus-created work like publications, presentations, data. Honestly, just about everything that appears in our open access institutional repository, UNT Scholarly Works. So DMPs and other research outputs fall under my domain as well. And then a little about my institution. We're the main campus for the UNT system. Enrollment for our campus was about 40,000 last year between graduate and undergraduate students. We received 222 sponsored awards, totaling almost $40 million. We are an R1 doctoral institution as of 2016, and there's been an increased focus on research and grants to reflect and support this designation, which has helped lead us to where we are today. So previously, for complying with all responsibility for complying with grant funder mandates was the sole responsibility of the principal investigator, or PI. However, we've implemented a process to help support PIs and make them aware of resources and provide reminders for compliance with their award funders' mandated access to data. So let's look at what helped us get us here. So as of 2019, a new VP of the Division of Research and Innovation was hired. The new VP was a big part in getting a serious conversation started on monitoring compliance, and he encouraged his team to work with the libraries to accomplish it. A little over a year later, in November of 2020, we introduced the new process, or as I call it, the DMP process, to the public, and it took effect on January 1st of this year. So we're 10 months in right now, and a big milestone is coming up in January of 2022. It'll be the first of many annual checkups on PIs to encourage them to make their research outputs publicly accessible as stipulated in their DMPs. So I'll go into this into a little bit more detail later. So I attribute a lot of this to our new leadership, and it definitely wouldn't have started without their help. But the UNT Libraries has had a lot to offer, so we weren't caught off guard when this conversation started. So the first being that we are already active grant receivers and seekers on campus. So we already had a relationship with the Division of Research and Innovation and experience with the grant process from the outside. So the second is our digital library, which we host content from faculty, staff, students, but also from partners around the globe. It's about 20 years old at this point, so we generally know what we're doing. And last but not least, we already had some data management services like DMP tool, our repositories in the digital library, and a data management team that provides consultations and support. So we had some infrastructure in place to support this initiative, which brings us to the actual workflow. So as I mentioned, I call it the DMP process. It was modeled after Utah State University's grant research system. The new VP came from that university, so we kind of went with the process since he was familiar with it, and we could support it in the digital library. The primary departments involved are the library's scholarly communications department, who provide the data management services, the digital curation unit under the digital library, which is my area, and the grants and contracts administration, or GCA, under the Division of Research and Innovation. All right. So beginning in the proposal stage, the GCA will let the PI know that a DMP is required by the grant they are pursuing. They will also reach out to the library's data management service team to let them know if the PI might be interested in the DMP tool or might need further assistance with creating their DMP. There are exceptions to this process, and not all awards will require DMPs that have to go through our process and be publicly accessible. Exceptions are decided by the GCA, and they include, but are not limited to, awards with IRB protocols, with personally identifiable information, or if there is expected intellectual property associated with the research. So if the grant is awarded, the GCA will reach out to the PI with some congratulations, along with basic information about the grant, along with the final version of the DMP. I will use this email to create a record in the digital library for the DMP. And once this part of the process is complete, I email the PI and the GCA to let them know the award's Persistent Grant Identifier, or PGI, because we love our acronyms, and provide them with a research inventory spreadsheet. So the PGI is an ID number that is used to connect the record between the digital library and GCA system. So hopefully it will help avoid confusion when the PI reports back to us on their research outputs. And then to talk a little bit about the research inventory spreadsheet, it's just an Excel sheet right now that the PI will use to report their data or publications and let us know where they are hosted. The PIs are encouraged but not required to host their data or publications in the digital library. So if they are hosted in an outside repository or in their lab's website, they'll let us know here. And once an inventory spreadsheet is shared with us, we'll archive it in the digital library. And during the life of the award, the PI will receive an annual reminder email that encourages them to share an updated version of the research inventory sheet. This will hopefully keep the PI from rushing to archive the work at the end of the award and also act as a reminder for their funder mandates. Okay, once an award ends, the PI will receive another reminder to archive their work. They will get an additional reminder 12 months later and a final reminder 36 months after the end of their award. The PI will be required to submit a statement confirming all data and publications have been disclosed to the library and all conditions of the DMP have been fulfilled. There are consequences in place for PIs that do not complete this process. If the GCA determines that a PI has failed to comply with their DMP 36 months after the end of the award, the PI will be restricted from access to the UNT pre-award proposal submission process until and unless the VP of Research Innovation provides a reconciliation for them. Obviously, we haven't reached this stage yet, but these are the current requirements that we have written. So the results of the process can be seen in our funded research projects collection housed in the digital library. It contains all of the DMPs that have gone through the process so far. This graphic is an overview of the collection. There are 56 DMPs from 9 colleges, including the libraries. But as I mentioned earlier, there are exceptions to the process and not all awards are included in this collection. The main takeaway is that the collection has been used over 800 times. This is surprising considering that these are just DMPs, not the full award application. However, as connected to the previous presentation, I'm guessing that they're being used as examples for other researchers writing their own DMPs. And most importantly, I want to talk about how it's going. So some of the positive things that have helped establish this process and ensure its success so far are the support we've received from our colleagues. We may not have it completely worked out yet, but in my experience, when I need something or I have questions, the GCA has been responsive and understanding. They may not be able to provide what I asked for, but they've tried to work with me at least. So the next piece that has made this successful is the thorough documentation that was created before everything was rolled out. The process was clearly laid out. It's available online for the PIs to review in their PI handbook. Even the email communications are templates. So it makes a confusing process more predictable and transparent for PIs. And I think that's helped avoid unnecessary confusion. And while the process has been planned and documented, we've still managed to be flexible and adjust as needed. Every award in PI is different. So we've gotten questions and feedback, and we've tried to reflect these in the process. And then finally, thank you. The PIs themselves have been very understanding and have made an effort to comply with the new requirements. I came in expecting the worst, considering the high stress nature that grants and deadlines cause, but so far I've been proven wrong. So in addition to things that have helped this process, I've begun to see some benefits from the collaboration. The first being that researchers are becoming more aware of library services. Outreach is a never-ending necessity for libraries, and this has given us some much-needed exposure. And speaking on my own experience with the institutional repository, I've seen interest from PIs unrelated to their grant about hosting work in the digital library. So it's exciting to interact with them outside of the DMP process. Another benefit is to see how and where PIs are plan on archiving the work. Again, they are encouraged to host it in the digital library, but they are not required to. And so far, about 40% of the DMPs currently in the collection contain some verbiage that says that they will host in the digital library, which is exciting. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this is a resource of DMP examples for others to use and reference, and I think the usage of the collection will continue to grow. We don't have quality assurance on them, but I'm hoping that they will get better at least. And finally, it's great that we're engaging PIs in responsible data management practices. I'm really interested to see how their responses to the annual reminders. I think that will be a litmus test on what their current practices are versus what is stipulated in their DMP. And then no system is perfect. So over the past 10 months, we found a few things that needed to be addressed. The first being some of our metadata records were not very detailed, and that's not really much to go on for interested users. So after some discussion with the GCA, we decided to ask the PI for short descriptions. We emphasized that this would help finding their work in the digital library and through search engines like Google. We still have some vague metadata records, but many PIs do provide short descriptions, and it's been a noticeable improvement. The next is communication channels. Everything comes out of a shared email address between the GCA and myself. However, it can be difficult to manage conversations this way. So I have to go to my personal inbox, email the GCA, resolve my problem, then go back to the shared email and respond to the PI. It's not a huge issue, it's just a little extra to juggle. The next is managing expectations related to the DMP process. The biggest is timing. So we try to maintain a 24-hour turnaround from receiving a DMP to it being archived in the digital library. But things come up and we've kind of had to get used to the process and being on that timeline. And the last is PI questions. And this comes back to different departments, different duties. So when questions come in, there's a slight delay as we discuss in another email thread or wait for the other department to answer. So we're getting better at dealing with these. I've picked up some GCA lingo and the GCA has picked up some library lingo. So we are adapting. And I've already touched on all these points, but I wanted to highlight them again to show that we're trying to continually improve this process and make it more easy or at least more helpful for those involved. And we haven't gone through all the process yet. I hope based on my experiences so far, it will be a reasonable process to get the research inventories or data or publications with minimal exceptions, but we'll see in January. And I do want to thank Kevin Hawkins, the Assistant Dean of the Library's Scholarly Communications Department, Michelle Hildebrand, the GCA analyst, and my main point of contact for this, and Mark Phillips, the Associate Dean for the Digital Libraries. They all worked really hard in establishing this process, and I'm doing my best to support it and continue it. So I have a couple of resources. The first is actually a link to the PI handbook or the relevant part of the PI handbook. And it's a very detailed version of the workflow I just talked through. So if you're interested, please go check it out. And then obviously my slides are from Slide Carnival. And thank you, most of all, obviously I'll answer questions here, but feel free to email me. I think this is going to be a really interesting process. Thank you.
That is great. Thank you, Whitney. And we've already got one question in. I think I know the answer, so I'm going to modify it slightly. Does UNT have any kind of electronic research administration system? And I suspect the answer is yes. So do you happen to know what vendor or platform it's on, like InfoReady Review or?
Yes, I think they just transferred systems, actually. They sent out an email, but I think they currently use Cayuse. I actually don't know how to pronounce it. I just read their emails.
Cayuse, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So Cayuse with a C.
Exactly. So that's what they use. I don't see a lot of their side of it, but I would like to look at it to see if we could, integrate it with the digital library.
And I'd like to remind, we've got a lot of virtual applause again. I'd like to remind people to put their questions in the Q&A. And in the meantime, I'm going to have take advantage of being the MC and having the mic power to ask. You said, and this mirrors my experience, that you learned things about how your grants coordination office does things and they learned things about you. Any particular things stand out to you on either side?
Some things that I think are simple questions, like I wanted project descriptions, but it turns out they don't feel comfortable sharing them because it's not their project. It might contain some information the PI wants to remain private. So they're very respectful of the process. They refer a lot back to the PI and try to allow them to stay in control of their research, even just the descriptions of it. So I thought that was really great.
And anything that might have stood out that they learned about library processes or scholarly communications or data management processes?
I think for me, at least, is to see them try to say, I think the library can do this. And then, I come in and say, yes, we can do this. You can look at it this way. Something so simple as they wanted to search through all of the DMPs for specific verbiage. And I was like, well, just search the digital library. They're fully text searchable. So, that's all you have to do. And even our scholarly communications people were like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. So it's even just the little things, the usability of things, not everybody knows.
Eric, you've got your hand up.
I couldn't use the Q&A anymore because I'm a panelist, but yeah, I do have a question. So some institutions I've met with have, they have a process like yours, but for conflict of interest statements, collecting those and making sure that researchers are including those when they are required to, and then giving them information that they may need to actually fill in those conflict of interest statements. Do you ever see any overlap in terms of that last point you just made of how much you're willing to share, or the PI is willing to share? Do you ever see any overlap between those things?
I haven't specifically related to that. I think the GCA really keeps that on their side of things. So maybe that's something we'll eventually talk about. But I have had PIs later in the process go, well, I want to keep this private. I don't think that this should be out there. And it's like, oh, well, it's already in the digital library. It's publicly available now. And personally, me reading over it, I don't see anything really identifiable or anything like that. But, we try to respect that, but sometimes it's too late,
There's a great question about whether your DMP collection will reflect proposal versus awarded proposals. Could you answer that really quickly?
Yeah, so the DMP collection is only awarded projects. So proposals do not get included in this collection.
Great, thank you so much for that session. That was fantastic. And now we are going to roll right on to another excellent presentation from Eric Olson on beginning at the end with data management curricula. This was co-authored by Nikki Pfeiffer and April Clybourne-Sharon, but only Eric will be presenting it. Eric, you have the screen.
All right, thanks so much, Nina. Yeah, I'm really excited to be part of this session because I get to follow up some really interesting and relevant material that you've already shared. So this is really good timing. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about how we are in the process of rebooting our training services here at the center, and just as a quick overview of who we are, at the Center for Open Science, we're a nonprofit based in Charlottesville, Virginia, and just up the road from UVA. There's some UVA folks here I can see represent. So to increase our mission at the very top level is to increase openness, integrity, and reproducibility of research. And we sort of attack that mission from multiple angles. We have infrastructure that we provide for researchers, services for institutions and other organizations, have a policy team that are advocating with journals and funders and institutions, and a research team. And just really at the sort of practical level, what are the barriers to researchers and research communities accomplishing some of these goals? And I like this image because it sort of says a lot in real just at a glance, where you have a lot of things that are hopefully the norm at this point in terms of what would be shared with a study that's being published, that there's some kind of open data. There's metadata involved, including PIDs, and a data management plan, as we've seen, very, very important. And getting consistency there is not always easy, but we're getting there. And then there's all these other things that would really support this idea of being transparent and reproducible research that are below the surface, that often don't get seen or don't get shared at all, which is a big risk if the idea is to have research that could be reproduced down the line, have your outcomes, your results reproduced. And so actually we have an existing training service, and our primary out-of-the-box workshop is public. It's open for anybody to look at and refer to and use the materials, and it's called the Introduction to Open and Reproducible Research. So it's certainly, it's several years old now, but it certainly was trying to get at that same goal. And what we found, though, as myself being the primary trainer over the last year, in addition to the other things that I do, is that rarely the institutions that I would talk to or labs or projects that had an interest in doing some of this training rarely was what they wanted, something that mapped right to this out-of-the-box curriculum. So instead, every time I was customizing the experience for their needs, because there were sometimes things that were in here that they didn't need at all, and they just didn't even want to spend time on it, and sometimes really wanted to emphasize some of those pieces. So this 3-hour workshop really it wasn't accomplishing the scalability and of the service that we really would prefer. So the goal was just to put all of this away. We're not going to build on this thing we had before. We're going to shove that away and start over. So don't squint and look at this, and we'll come back to it. But just to give you a tease here, this looks very different, what we're getting to now, compared to what we had before, the sort of monolithic one approach to every audience that we did previously. And so really what I want to talk about is how we got from starting from scratch to where we are. And as you probably are not surprised to see that we used some of the methods from the carpentries who have been doing this for several years and are just really, really terrific community. And we didn't want to reinvent the methods wheel here. So we used a lot of their concepts in terms of how you break down the needs of a workshop training curriculum and turn those into useful sessions. And so there are these 4 major steps here where you're identifying the curriculum objectives, and I'll get into the specific points here in a minute. Identifying the target skills that actually help the audience achieve those objectives, design the exercises themselves, the actual activities within the sessions, and then the content and narratives that sort of flesh out those workshops for the participants. And so this is just a look at how we started with identifying both stakeholders and audiences. And from our perspective, these were two different groups that do often overlap. A stakeholder would be a group that is requesting, seeking out training, contracting training services, and the audience is the actual participants in those sessions. And so sometimes those are different groups. With librarians that are in the room, you probably have examples of both of these where you're bringing in some kind of training service to do a train the trainers type session with all of your librarians to help them better support your research community. You would be both a stakeholder and an audience in that case. But if one of the one of the librarians identified a gap that's in the community that they work with, the discipline on campus that they work with, and wanted to bring in a workshop that would be particularly to help with that discipline's research practices. Those practices are probably different than the librarians and may not be the intended audience, the librarian that is. So they would be the stakeholder, but not necessarily the audience. So it's getting all of this mapped out so we have an understanding of who is actually looking for services and then who's going to be in those sessions. And then for those audiences, actually mapping out the objectives for each of those. And those are objectives as we understand what these audiences are typically trying to accomplish, as well as some of the things that we are hoping to instill in these different groups. And we had these three really high level audiences that we came up with, that there's lots of little buckets in between or within each of them, but these are the highest level, where we have research staff like librarians, data managers, research support staff that often will end up, their needs are in that train the trainers type environment where they are learning the tools, but not just learning to use them, also have some resources and knowledge that can help them share that resource with their communities. And then researchers themselves, obviously, for them, it is to learn about, prepare for, and meet the mandates or practices that are going to be highly encouraged by their funders, publishers, institutions, motivate them to begin that adoption, even if it's not required yet, seeing the value in adopting some of those practices, and then just trying to understand where there are some of those fears, to Melissa's point just a minute ago, about where that they are concerned about that participation and sharing. And then the high level objective, for the third group here, which we have this really big bucket of what we call managers. So they're the program officers, community managers for societies and other groups, and editors at journals. And for them, it's an opportunity to think through the anticipated policies that they're maybe considering or weighing or drafting, and what an impact of those policies will be on the researchers downstream, and how they might communicate and advocate for those policies and help researchers prepare to actually support or implement those. Because if they put something out there that the researchers aren't ready to actually do, then they're not going to be highly adopted very quickly. And then, from identifying those high level objectives, recognizing that there are skills within each of those objectives that would really help them walk out of that room having felt that they have achieved or have the resources now to achieve those objectives. So for each of those audiences, we listed out all of the skills that we thought would be really relevant to each of those audiences. All three of us, and then a much larger group participated in this exercise. And then it was prioritizing those. So the ones that many of us identified as skills that either we know researchers are highly desire to pursue, or they are high priority in order to, for us to use trained services to move toward the mission. Those high priority skills are, this is a tool called Mural here. So we were just kind of throwing these on the board, grouping them in the audience that they came from, these skills. And then the green are the most high priority items, all the way down to the red, which are, excuse me, not as high priority. And then started to group them by how they are they related to one another in such a way that they would make sense to work on together in a workshop, these skills, for the different audiences. And so this is what we have come up with, which is this 8-module approach that obviously is much different than the one-size-fits-all workshop that we had before. And so each of these would be slightly different for each audience. And some are sort of more obviously relevant to some audiences than others. And where we're starting is actually 1 through 3 and then module 5. Oddly, that's how we ended up. For the first 4 that we're going to get done by about the end of this year. And so just to give you an idea of what these look like, this very first one is separate from a lot of the things that we talk about and evangelize here at the center. We're not getting into pre-registration in this one. We're not getting into registered reports and all of those things that we like to talk about, and certainly is a big part of the current workshop. And instead, it's at the very beginning. What are the things to think through in the data management world that can help you avoid that iceberg? So identifying your data management requirements, the data management plan, which you've seen good examples of that already today. And then some of that organizational elements, naming conventions, data dictionaries, code books, readmes, how you set up your structure, and then identifying a repository, which it's its own color because that's a pretty big challenge all its own. But this is what module 1 looks like, and this one would be at least a 90-minute session. The rest of these are all designed to be an hour. And when an institution or a lab or a project sees they want to attack some of these areas, they don't have to do all the modules. They pick the ones that are relevant to them, and then we help support those sessions. And we'll have eventually both synchronous and asynchronous versions of these, so you could sort of provide them for your researchers, and you wouldn't necessarily need me there for that. Or you'd have a version where COS staff would help support, and really eventually not just COS staff. I'd love to see this be something that that lots of advocates in the community could support. And we do have a pretty strong community of folks that do their own workshops that have COS and OSF related things in them. So I don't think we're miles and miles away from that, but we do need to provide the resources to help support those that are interested in doing that. So yeah, thank you. So we're at these last steps now of designing those exercises and the narrative, the content that will flesh out those sessions. So we have modules 1 and 2 almost done and ready to get out there and try. And then, as I said, the goal is to have 4 of those modules ready by the end of the year, and then eventually get the rest of those done as well. And so that will replace that existing workshop. That'll be gone, and we'll have these available as training services going forward. So yeah, that was our story on rebooting our training services, and anybody who does training stuff on campus, including those that talked today, I'd love to talk to you about some of what you've learned just in terms of the pedagogy and how that your experience so far, so that I can integrate any of those experiences in here as well. So really appreciate being part of this session, and thanks for joining and listening in.
Thank you, Eric. That was really excellent, and it's awesome that you went through such a complex and integrated process for planning these. I'm hoping people will put questions in the Q&A, or possibly if you've gone through similar training and you saw things that either matched or didn't match, you could put it in the chat and maybe we'll end up having a conversation about it. Are you doing, I'm going to take advantage of having the mic again. Are you doing the training, especially the first one that's a little bit more, that you showed towards the end, that's a little bit more general principles? Are you doing that and demonstrating it, things like file organization in OSF? Or are you talking more like general?
Yeah, we will try to be really general, and I actually, even in the existing workshops, I've replaced pieces to have a landscape overview section where obviously I'm going to use the OSF for a number of things, but put this big picture, the map of research tools that are out there, including DMP tool and the PIDs and the things that might not necessarily come up along the way as we do some of those other general exercises. So my goal is never to pull them from one tool they already like to another. But some of those, like the file structure things, I would use OSF as the demonstrating tool there, unless they told me they really wanted to use something else and they could provide it for me, then I would do that. But yeah, I would use the OSF in those appropriate moments, but the goal is not to isolate the OSF as the one solution to all of these problems, because it's definitely not. So that's why the OSF isn't named in most of those materials.
And Sherry notes that UVA's reproducibility workshop, if people want to go back to the content, which has been linked on the OSF, also sort of mirrors and resonates with similar conclusions of what needs to be prioritized. We have two questions in the Q&A that are pretty similar. Are the training materials open or going to be open, and will there be an OSF for this revised curriculum?
So yes, we will, once these modules are have the training, the manuals for instructors and all of those materials, like the current workshop materials, those will be available, and an institution or researcher or librarian could go and access those and use them if they want. And the difference there is you just wouldn't have myself or another trainer there to facilitate those. But yeah, we'll make those available when they are ready for that. And is there a new OSF for the revised curricula? I think you probably mean an OSF project for that, and no, there's not one yet. But by the end of the year, we'll have something for those first couple of modules up and ready. Probably won't replace the current one just yet. We'll keep that one up there, but yeah, soon.
And then Linny also asks, can you describe Mural and your process with working with Mural for brainstorming?
Yeah, Mural is a really neat tool that's kind of like having, if you back when we used to do conferences in person all the time, one of the exercises I always would like is putting up the big, poster board type things, and then have an activity where everybody has post-it notes, sticky notes. And then you give different colors, different teams, or different topics or something. And then everybody's slapping them up there, and you kind of see where the conversation goes that way. And everybody can stand around and do it together. So it's a very open collaborative process. And basically Mural is a digital version of that. That's exactly what it is. You can structure a little environment, a board, and then everybody can take Post-it notes and post them up all over this environment. And then you can move them around and change, where they fit and all of that. So it's a really, for just active brainstorming where you have a group that need to be on the same page all together. It's a really useful tool for that. So yeah, I encourage anybody that does a lot of those kinds of exercises to look into it, because it's a really neat tool.